reaction is this morning.
Please stay tuned now to more continuing coverage from ABC News of America under attack. Giuliani.
We want to reset, though, as to exactly where we are right now. We're starting this morning. It's 7 o'clock, and normally we'd be signing on the air with Good Morning America, but ABC News has not left the air for the past 22 hours now since the occurrences began yesterday morning at the World Trade Center towers. There are still fires burning at the Pentagon. John McWethy talking about the fact those fires are so difficult because that is an old building with a wooden structure in many areas. And this is the scene in downtown New York, the site of the 2 dropped World Trade Center towers. Number 7 World Trade Center also down. And you get some sense, this is at a distance, but you get some sense of just what an incredible pile of rubble it is, 5 stories high. And you still see policemen standing there at the intersections with masks over their face. This is the scene overnight as equipment was brought in, fires still burning on that site overnight.
And we will hope to hear from the mayor. How many people were retrieved? How many bodies? And what about all these reports that there were people phoning out through the night?
Mayor Rudolph Giuliani of New York is joining us this morning. Mr. Mayor, I know this has been an unbelievable past 22 hours for you, and I appreciate
Thank you.
Your being with us. First of all, what can you tell us about what's going on down at the scene right now?
I can tell you that all through the night, there were over 1,000 people, at some points 2,000 people, working on the rescue effort, trying to move a lot of the large parts of buildings and other debris that are there out of the way, trying to rescue people. We were successful in rescuing two people, and there's a third one that we're in contact with. Hopefully there are others that are near him that we're trying to get out, but at least one person that we're in contact with. And we now have 41 fatalities at this point that we know of. And the reality is that we have, looks like about 202 firefighters that are still missing, and police officers, both New York City and Port Authority police officers. Of the uniformed personnel, we probably have about 260 people that are unaccounted for, that we're searching for. And of course, we don't know what the death toll will be with regard to the actual building.
But 202 firefighters, you say, and 200, I mean, those numbers just tear your heart. 259
uniformed service members, which would be made up of the New York City Fire Department, the New York City Police Department, and the Port Authority Police Department. The 2 people that we rescued late last night or early in the morning were 2 Port Authority police officers.
So I just want to get that straight. You say 259 uniformed people overall, 202 firefighters, did you say?
Correct.
That would leave 57 police
officers and Port Authority police officers. Oh, and then of course we're talking about the possibility of of thousands of people. We don't know the numbers yet with regard to whoever was unlucky enough, unfortunate enough to have been left in the building when the 2 buildings collapsed.
Can you give me some sense of just the magnanimity of this task?
No, the magnanimity of the task is weeks and weeks of cleanup, which we have to take a day at a time, and we will.
You've got essentially a 5-story or higher pile of rubble where each of those buildings were, right?
Correct, and then smaller ones for the other buildings and the other damage that was done. Other buildings came down, other buildings were hit and damaged. So we're going to have to take this a day at a time, and we'll work our way out of this. And the city is going to come out of this stronger and more determined than it ever was before. But we have to understand that we're all going to have very difficult emotions about this and very difficult feelings about it. We worked late into the night organizing the effort for today and tomorrow, and we have tremendous amount of assistance. We actually have more volunteers than we need right now, which is really wonderful. When I was there...
Mr. Mayor, Diane Sawyer.
Yeah, Diane.
I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that 2 had been rescued. You were in contact with a third. Can you tell us how you're in contact with that third person?
We're in voice contact with him. The fire and police rescue team is able to talk to him. He's trapped right now, and they're trying to rescue them, trying to get them out. They're able to talk to them.
You had mentioned before that there had been calls, some cell phone calls. Any other calls that you're hearing?
Yes, there are others.
Still?
There are other reports of calls, and part of the difficulty is making sure you put them all together, and you're not talking about the same ones. So they're in different parts of the area, hoping that they're in contact with people. There's only one that I know of that's an actual ongoing rescue effort right now.
I'm curious as to how that person could have survived. Any sense? I mean, is he in some sort of pocket, or
Yeah,
what do we know?
Yesterday I visited this firefighter at St. Vincent's Hospital, whose entire company was saved because they were in a void. And they were in the void for 5 hours, and their colleagues are missing, and they believe their colleagues may be dead. But this group of 6 or 7 firefighters were in a void, and therefore they were protected. And when they finally were extricated, they were shocked to find that the whole building had come down, because they had been in this protected void. They heard the explosion, they heard everything else, but everything just fell around them. So we're hopeful that there are going to be other situations like this in this mass building collapses, that there'll be areas where there were protected pockets.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned the 41 fatalities that you know about at this point, and we know this is just the beginning. But I wonder if you can give us any sense of how many people were reported missing overnight. Any sense of that magnitude?
No, I don't have the civilian numbers in terms of reported missing. I don't know how many. I would just be guessing at that number. I know we had 1,700 injuries that we know of people that we took to the hospital, or people that where we accounted for their injuries, anywhere from very serious to minor injuries. So that means 1,700 injuries.
A couple of other
from
reports.
One incident is horrendous, obviously.
Sure. A couple of other reports I wanted to ask you about. One report that ferries were ferrying bodies across the river, and across the Hudson River as often as 10 minutes into the night.
You mean are you talking about dead bodies?
That's
No.
right.
I don't know of that report.
The dead are being taken to the medical examiner's office?
Yes, they're all, right now, the procedure is that they're all being taken to the medical examiner's office. Medical examiner Hirsch is confident that he can handle at least the original numbers. We have another site in the Bronx and then another site in Manhattan, but right now, as I said, there's only 41 that we can account for.
Mr. Mayor, let me ask you about the conditions of the city of New York. Last night we heard that everything essentially south of 14th Street, and for those people around the country who don't know New York very well, that's an enormous amount of real estate territory, a lot of neighborhoods.
Sure, that area is the third largest business district in the country. Midtown Manhattan is the largest, Chicago, and then the lower Manhattan is the third largest business district in the United States. So that gives you a sense of the scope of it. The scope of it is it's a very, very big area, and probably the financial capital of the world.
And that is going to be closed down to all but emergency vehicles for how long?
That's going to be closed down all day today. We're not going to make a decision until probably this afternoon about tomorrow, again, because we want to take this a day at a time. But the core area where the cleanup is being done, I mean, you're talking in terms of days and weeks that it's going to take to clean that up.
Right.
And we want to do it carefully. There's also the consideration that it's a crime scene, so we want to work under the direction of the police and the FBI to make sure that we retain the evidence that they're going to need to figure out, what happened, and hopefully be able to bring people to justice for this.
And a question about the heightened security in New York, Mr. Mayor. We have reports this morning that the aircraft carrier USS George Washington is now in position off the coast of the city. We also have reports that NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command, has gone on alert and activated F-15, F-16 fighter planes flying combat air patrol over New York. And AWACS planes are now currently up in the air. Just asking you, are there any signs, any warnings that there could be more, that there might be something today?
I checked as of 15 minutes ago, and there are no specific threats of any kind. There is general concern, as there should be, and I appreciate very, very much the personal concern of the President of the United States Navy, all of whom called us yesterday and talked to us, and they're taking special precautions because of what happened yesterday. But there is no specific piece of information. But the people of the city of New York very much appreciate that. Obviously, as they wake up this morning, they're going to be confronting an attack on New York and on the United States in dimensions that we've never experienced before in our history. And the assistance and the help and the security that offers to the people of the city, I think, are very important, if for no other reason but psychological.
Mr. Mayor, I know that you get focused on what do I have to do next in each incremental step and what decision needs to be made. But to talk to you a little bit about the macro of all of this, the overall situation, there is no more visible symbol of New York than the World Trade Center. It has dominated the skyline of this city for more than 30 years. And you plan for these things, and there's all sorts of horrible scenarios that you have to think about. But what was your gut yesterday?
Oh, the feelings that I had yesterday, I think I'll be thinking about for the rest of my life. I lost some very, very good friends, people that I know very, very well, personal friends, and talked to some of them just a few minutes before they died. So you've got to put those feelings as much in the background as possible and focus on the effort that we have ahead of us. And I agree with you. The World Trade Center was one of the great visible symbols of New York, but the real symbol of New York is the spirit of its people. These are we're the most diverse people in the world. We're very, very strong people. We're very proud Americans, and New Yorkers are going to give an example to the people who attacked us of how people who love democracy react to something like this. We're going to be stronger as a result of having gone through this.
But you were talking to some friends in that building who I suspect knew they were going to die.
No, right before the collapse, I talked to several of the high command of the fire department.
Sure.
And a Roman Catholic priest, Father Michael Judge, who is a chaplain for the fire department, who I've known for many years. And we were moving our command center to 75 Barclay Street, and they were remaining at West Street in order to have a view of the rescue effort. So I said goodbye to them and wished them luck, and asked Father Judge to pray for us, which I often did. And then a few minutes later, we're notified that that part of the building collapse had fallen in their area. So, I mean, I think all New Yorkers are going to experience what I and the fire commissioner and the police commissioner experienced yesterday, that we've lost people that are close friends. The numbers here are so great. We have to feel that, we have to understand we're going to feel it, and then we have to focus on how we clean up this horrible debris, which we're going to do. And we're going to, hopefully, I'm very hopeful we're going to find more people. We're going to rescue some more people, and we're going to keep at it until we're sure of that.
Mr. Mayor, I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the coverage. It was enormously helpful yesterday. A lot of people used the television coverage as a way of figuring out how to get out of there, and you were enormously helpful to many of our citizens, and I thank you very much.
Well, we thank you for being with us. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Let us turn right now, because we have with us live Secretary of State Colin Powell. And Mr. Secretary, we're so grateful to you for joining us this morning. I'm going to start right in on a news report, if I can. There is a report that American embassies around the world are being asked to shut down. Is this true?
We have given discretion to all of our ambassadors to close down or temporarily suspend operations based on their judgment of the threat level. 25% of our embassies overseas are currently shut down or have suspended operations, but there are no direct threats yet to any of those embassies. It's precautionary in nature, and I expect they will all be resuming operations as soon as possible. Let me also express my deepest sadness and my condolences to the families of those who lost their lives, and once again reinforce the determination of the United States government to respond with all the forces at its disposal, as the President said last night. And we're hard at work at that already on the diplomatic front here in the State Department this morning.
Do you have signals that there is more to come today?
I have no signals that there is more to come today, but one never knows. But so far, nothing to suggest that there is something waiting to happen today, and let's hope that is the case.
Mr. Secretary, did we miss any signals? in the last couple of weeks, or were there simply no signals?
In the first 24 hours of analysis, I have not seen any evidence that there was a specific signal that we missed. There is always a general level of concern about terrorist activity, and there are always warnings that are out there, but they are seldom specific enough to be actionable. Many times they do happen to be actionable, and a lot of terrorist incidents have been stopped because we did get intelligence. In this case, we did not have intelligence of anything of this scope or magnitude. And so America has suffered a terrible loss, but what has not been lost is our spirit, our resiliency as a society. They have failed in that. As the President said last night, we will go after them, and what we will especially do is go after those nations, those states, those organizations that provide haven for this kind of activity, and we will not let up. And we'll make sure that all of our friends and allies and those who would be our friends who have anything to do with harboring this kind of activity will discover that they cannot have a friendly relationship with the United States if they continue to do so.
But, Mr. Secretary, do you share the sense that so many do, that this was so sophisticated, so well planned, that it had to have taken years?
I wouldn't say it had to take years, but it certainly took an extended period of time. It was a very sophisticated, well-planned, well-coordinated attack, showing that it just wasn't done by your average car bomber, but a very sophisticated organization, and the evidence will accumulate in the course of the next several days, which will, I think, point us in the right direction as to who is responsible for it.
But we know there is so much anger welling up in the country right now. I've got the Daily News here, the New York Daily News, which has a headline, "It's War." First of all, is it war as you see it? And if it's Osama bin Laden, what is going to work against him?
Well, American people have a clear understanding that this is a war. That's the way they see it. You can't see it any other way, whether legally that is correct or not.
You do too?
And yes, I do. And we've got to respond as if it is a war. And we've got to respond in the sense that it isn't going to be solved with a single counterattack against one individual. It's going to be a long-term conflict, and it's going to be fought on many fronts: the military front, the intelligence front, the law enforcement front, the diplomatic front. And it's a war not just against the United States. It's a war against civilization. It's a war against all nations that believe in democracy. But democracy can't be defeated. But now it's going to require all nations who believe in democracy to come out and condemn this kind of activity, to work together to go after those who perpetrate such activity. And it requires that kind of coordinated, complete response on behalf of the civilized communities of the world.
But, Mr. Secretary, so many equations have been made to Pearl Harbor in all of this. It may well be, could well be, that we wind up with a death toll from this higher even than occurred at Pearl Harbor. These were civilians, unsuspecting civilians, that were hit in what they thought would be a secure place. And you wonder, you're very judicious about the commitment of American forces, but you wonder just in terms of planning what's going on and in terms of thinking what's going on and what is, when we find out who did this, a kind of appropriate military response.
Well, first we have to find out who did it, and the response may have many dimensions. It may be military, and I certainly hope we can find people that are targetable and we can take action directly against them. But we shouldn't just wait for a single target and then go after it militarily. There are many other things we can be doing to root out these networks, to pull up these places of haven, to destroy training camps. And it's going to take a concerted, long-term effort.
Mr. Secretary, there are reports, this is George Stephanopoulos, reports from Afghanistan this morning that UN officials are being evacuated and also diplomats from Australia, the United States, and Germany. Has the United States recommended that evacuation?
George, I need to check on that. I hadn't received those reports at the time I came down here, but that would seem to be a prudent action.
One other thing, Mr. Secretary, do we have any idea what happened in Kabul last night?
Not entirely, but does not appear to be related to what happened in New York and Washington. It seems to be a separate incident that relates to other activities, not directly related to this attack.
That may have been occasioned by what happened in New York? Was it some sort of a rebel group going after the Taliban? Do we know anything?
That seems to be the case, but I do not have any reason to believe it is related to what happened in New York.
And I just want to follow up on what I thought I heard you say earlier. If it came to U.S. ground troops in Afghanistan in order to go after Osama bin Laden. Would you back that?
As the President said, we will do whatever is necessary to deal with this, and I would not remove any of the options available to the President. As you said, I'm judicious in the use of force, and I also believe that when it is time to use force, you use it in a decisive way. But we're far from selecting any particular military targets or how to go after those targets at this time. We've got to build a case first.
But talk to me a little bit about very specific language in the President's speech. It was the sentence that struck all of us, that we will not only move against those who perpetrated this, but those who harbored them.
Yeah, the reality is that there are nations, there are organizations out there that give support to these kinds of terrorist activities. They provide facilities, they provide homes, they provide support for them, they provide money for them, and we're going to go after all of them. We're going to make it clear to them that you cannot have any kind of decent relationship with the United States if you do this, and we will go after the support that allows terrorists to perform these kinds of acts.
But that
gives them havens.
That could be many states. That could
Yes,
be
it
not
could.
just Afghanistan. It could be other states. And do you contemplate the possibility of military action against?
No, not necessarily. We're contemplating a full court press, whether it's diplomatic, legal, intelligence sharing, and for those nations that we believe can do a better job of policing their borders, of going after this kind of activity, we're going to work with them. We're going to make it clear to them that this will be a standard against which they're measured with respect to their relationship with the United States.
Mr. Secretary, the response you're talking about could take a long time and could be quite controversial in the Middle East. Have you been in contact with Jordan and Egypt, and do you have any indication that they'll support this kind of effort?
I have calls in to all of the leaders in the region. So far this morning, I have spoken to the Secretary General of the United Nations, the Lord Robertson in NATO, and Javier Solana of the European Union, and as soon as these interviews are over, I will be on the phone to leaders in the Middle East as well.
All right, Mr. Secretary, we'll let you get to work then. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Secretary of State Colin Powell, and we appreciate his joining us this morning. I want to go to the lawn of the White House. Terry Moran is there. Terry, some new information?
Well, Charlie, let me just bring you up to date on what we know of the president's doings today. He showed up in the Oval Office a little after 7 a.m. That is typical for him. His national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, already on the scene here in the White House. One detail is that the president, as George mentioned earlier, will be meeting with the congressional leadership, the joint congressional leadership, who will be here in the cabinet room, and he will be meeting with them at 11:30 this morning. There's also going to be a blood drive set up on the White House grounds, in the White House complex at the old Executive Office building, and the President and the First Lady intend to drop by that blood drive here. The officials here are encouraging all of us who work at the White House to donate blood, and the President and the First Lady will be doing the same. It is going to be a day, as you can imagine, that is going to be absolutely packed for the President with meetings and decisions about what is the next step to take. In that National Security Council meeting that he chaired last night before retiring for the evening, we were told that he was given a full briefing on the status of the investigation. At that point, things have advanced since then, and that is undoubtedly what he is hearing about now.
All right.
Terry Moran, thank you.
Terry, we do thank you, and as we said, we're going to keep you up to date on everything that is new this morning, and these may be new pictures for you if you weren't up very, very late into the wee hours of the morning, because we received some home video now, and you're going to see it, a picture of the first plane that hit the first World Trade Center tower.
American Airlines Flight 11 that was out of Boston, a Boeing 767. This is the plane hitting the first World Trade Center tower, the explosion of flame. No one had any idea it was coming. It was a total surprise. By the time we took air, which was a few minutes later, we had the first pictures of that building. We didn't know if it was an explosion, if it was a bomb, if it was a missile, or if it was an airplane that had mistakenly flied into the World Trade Center tower. But there it is, hitting the tower. American Airlines Flight 11, there were a total of 92 people aboard.
And we'll just repeat again for those of you who certainly saw it yesterday, but none of us will ever forget it. The scene of that second plane coming in, and This is a scene taken by Evan Fairbanks, who is a photographer, a freelance photographer. It's United Airlines Flight 175.
Yeah, this is not the Fairbanks pictures, but this is a picture of the plane. Oh. I don't care how many times you see it. It is just awful. Go ahead. Well, that's the 767. That's the United Flight 175 that flew in just 18 minutes later into the second World Trade Center tower. We showed you the New York Daily News, the tabloid. Did we show the New York Times headline on the paper? The Times, which is always very judicious in its use of headlines, has a banner headline this morning: U.S. attack. And then the sub-headline that says, hijacked jets destroy Twin Towers and hit Pentagon in day of terror. And now the New York Post, we've just gotten our copy of the New York Post, where it says an active war on the, I can't get this position very well, active war on the cover of the plane there, poised in the picture we just saw, about to hit the second World Trade Center tower, and then inside, the day that terror hit home in the United States. I'm sorry. USA Today, John Miller's just holding up USA Today, which is now out, act of war. And the pictures, again, just as grisly as they are in every other newspaper. I want to go to ABC's Cynthia McFadden, who has been covering the casualty situation at the hospitals in New York. And Cynthia, I don't know if you heard the mayor when he was with us, but he gave us some numbers on fatalities, 41 fatalities, civilian fatalities that they have found so far. And that number obviously is very premature. 202 firefighters missing, and you have to worry or presume that they may be dead, and 57 other uniformed officers. That's New York policemen and Port Authority police, but I know you've been covering those who were injured at the hospitals.
Well, and Charlie, of course, what no one wants to say is the fact that the hospitals are not treating more victims this morning is very bad news indeed. They have been working all night trying to excavate people, but this morning, St. Vincent's, at the trauma center at Chelsea Piers, there just are not people being brought here for treatment. The doctors are ready, but they are not available. I have Governor Pataki here with me. He has come down to visit the hospital, as well as he's toured the entire Ground Zero site last night and this morning. Governor, thanks for joining us this morning. What can you tell us from being at Ground Zero?
Well, it is incredible to see the devastation. You can imagine it, but when you actually see block after block of concrete that's been turned to dust and rubble all over the place, it's an incredible scene. But amidst that devastation, you see firefighters and police officers and National Guard troops down there with tremendous courage, risking their lives, going through the search and rescue operation, cleaning the debris, and hoping that we can recover more people alive.
Governor, we understand that until very late last night, they weren't really even able to begin the digging effort.
When I was down there last night, they actually had people at the site of the towers themselves, and it was incredibly courageous to see, because right next door, there was still another high-rise on fire, in flames, that had a risk of collapsing, but they're just incredibly courageous heroes down there, risking their lives in the hopes that we can save some additional lives.
Governor, tell us your reaction to the sights you saw last night.
It's just incredible to see, you know, but we've also seen sites that are inspirational. New Yorkers coming together, lining up for blocks to give blood, volunteering here at the hospitals. And, you know, you'd look in the eyes of the firefighters down there last night, covered with dust and debris, and you could sense the sorrow as they tried to recover some of their colleagues who are buried in that rubble, but you could also sense the inspiration and the courage and the strength that they are showing. And it's that courage and strength that's going to get us through this, and that's going to allow us to come back stronger and not have our freedom taken from us by this horrible terrorist act.
Governor, of course, the fact that so few victims are being brought to the hospitals this morning is a very bad sign. What are the emergency services personnel telling you? What's the briefing this morning?
We just don't know. We do believe that there are still people alive in the rubble. There have been some indications of cell phone communications. Late last night, 2 Port Authority police officers were taken from the rubble alive and were saved. So the focus now is on search and rescue. We have 18 search and rescue teams down there, more coming from as as far away as Puerto Rico. We're not going to give up hope, and we're just going to do everything we can to try to save every life possible.
Are you persuaded that at this point the state has all the resources it needs to be able to continue to search and rescue?
The cooperation and support has been enormous. The city has the best professional firefighters and police officers in the world. The state support, National Guard and emergency services has been tremendous in their help, and the federal officials have given us everything we want. And of those 18 search and rescue teams, we have them from Connecticut, we have them from surrounding states and from all across America, and we're very grateful for that outpouring of support.
Thank you, Governor Pataki, for joining us this morning. Charlie, Diane, back to you.
All right, thanks very much, Cynthia McFadden and Governor Pataki. Appreciate your stopping and talking to Cynthia. And as the mayor, Mayor Giuliani, said to us just a few moments ago, this process of untangling this massive amount of material that is there in the World Trade Center area is going to take weeks, if not months. And they have to treat it as a crime scene, not only as a search scene, but a crime scene, and that makes it take even longer.
That's right. As we promised, we're going to bring you up to date on everything new this morning about those who did it and how they did it. And we're going to start because we've got investigative reporter Brian Ross here, and he's been talking to the FBI.
Well, Diane, in the last 25 minutes or so, FBI agents have entered the home of a man by the name of Muhammad Atta in Venice, Florida. He is one of two people who they had a APB, all points bulletin, out for overnight, looking for a car registered to him and another car registered to a rental service in Boca Raton, Florida.
Who is he? What do we know about him?
We don't know anything about him. There's been quite a bit of activity in Florida overnight. Agents also are following up leads of a car found, as we had reported earlier, at the Daytona Beach Airport, where there was a picture of Omar bin Laden found in the car. And the owner of the car reportedly was a student at a flight school in Daytona Beach, Florida, who had been kicked out of the school. One highly placed source in Washington said that, told us overnight that the executive branch has concluded that the list of suspects will be small because there must be highly trained pilots who have been involved, and they are looking through the various flight schools and connections that way.
What led them to Florida? Do we know, Brian? And do we have any idea what led them to this individual? Because obviously the planes were not hijacked from there. It was the far north of there.
Right. The best leads have come from the flight manifest. By 1:30, 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, they were running names off the list of passengers on the plane. And that seems to have been one of the ways they got to both South Florida to Daytona Beach. And then, of course, in the Boston area, there are a number of people they're looking for as well.
Brian asked you to stick around because we're going to turn now to crime and justice specialist John Miller, who's with us this morning. There are other details emerging this morning about who and how?
They've been going over the tapes of the 911 calls made from the plane and analyzing the accounts of different passengers. And in more than one flight, the FBI has come into a theory that there was a plan here to, on takeoff, while the seatbelt lights were still on, to attack the flight attendants with knives and box cutters in the cabin as a diversion to lure the pilot or the co-pilot out of the cockpit to investigate the commotion in the cabin. As soon as that door was open, then storming inside to take control of the plane. And that's the operating theory on at least two of these flights from what they've been able to analyze.
So they attacked the flight attendants.
Right.
Lured the pilots out and then went into the cockpits.
On most domestic flights, certainly with American carriers, the procedure is that the cockpit door is locked. So they had to come up with some kind of ruse to gain entry into the cockpit. And it seems to be attacking the flight attendants was designed to draw somebody from the cockpit out.
Just one more time to go over a report that we talked about earlier in the morning, and people are joining us as the morning goes on. But Brian was talking about these activities by federal agents in the state of Florida. And we've also had reports this morning that in Boston, they have seized a car which apparently was used by hijackers that went into the Boston airport. They had apparently come down from Canada through Portland, Maine, rented a car there, and driven to Boston to carry out the hijackings.
That's one of the reports, and this morning we're being told, again, to focus on the fact that that is a very, as they say, soft border. That's an easy access point back and forth. And if you recall, at the time of the millennium, where they had a number of arrests of, or searches of people in the Boston area, connected with a possible terror suspect at that point.
And flight manuals also, John, found in that car?
That's right. Flight manuals in Arabic were found in a national rent-a-car that was at the central parking area at Logan Airport. The car had been rented by one man, and by going through the manifest, they've identified 5 names. 2 of them are brothers. One of them is a pilot that they're focusing on, and it appears to be a different pilot from the man in Florida. So it looks like there were a number of people, 2 or more, who had in-flight experience and who may have trained others.
And does it surprise you they left this kind of evidence behind?
In a suicide mission, I'm sure being traced or caught was probably not their concern.
Yeah, there's an ironic detail that they got to the Logan airport so late that their luggage didn't make the plane. I can't imagine that's of much concern.
Well, it's interesting because in most carriers, there's a system of passenger claiming where where the opposite is true. If your luggage makes the plane and you don't, it doesn't take off. The opposite doesn't apply, though.
Yeah. All right, John Miller, Brian Ross, thanks very much. Senator John McCain, Republican of Arizona, is joining us this morning. Senator McCain, can you hear me? Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Charlie Gibson and Diane Sawyer here, and I appreciate your joining us. We were just talking to the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, and about what really is appropriate response in this instance, and the fact that this country is angry right now, really angry. Your sense of that?
Well, I agree, Charlie. This country is very angry, and controlled fury, I guess, is as good a description. And there's no doubt that Americans have every right to demand a complete and thorough response. The question is, obviously, who did it, and I thought the president last night made a very important point in his excellent speech to the nation, where he said that not only do those organizations have to be punished, but those nations that shelter them as well, and that's going to be something which I think may be a long-term project.
Well, and we've made the point a number of times this morning, Senator, but it's a very difficult one, and it will present a great conundrum for this administration and for the military establishment, for the Congress, that indeed this could be, if it turns out to be bin Laden or bin Laden connected, that this could be not just one nation, but it could be a number that have harbored people involved in this organization.
I agree, but I think unless we get out at the fundamental problem, and that is that there is a network, a veritable network in that part of the world. We know there was allegations concerning Iranian participation in the Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia. There's been allegations about Iraq, Libya, even North Korea. So I don't think there's any doubt that there's a system out there, or a network, and that network is going to have to be attacked, and this may be a very long-term proposition, but I'm convinced that the American people will stay the course, as we have in other times of crisis.
There's patience, you think, in this country about this?
I think there's an understandable impatience, but I believe the president will explain to the American people that this has to be done in a measured and methodical fashion. Just launching a bunch of cruise missiles, the so-called pinprick responses that we employed before, are not going to do it, and everybody knows that. So it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of American treasure, and perhaps some American blood.
Senator McCain, we thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And as we know, there are going to be congressional meetings throughout the day, congressional briefings. Hope to hear more from you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go now to Don Daler, who is on the scene, and we like to stay in touch and see exactly what's happening down with the firefighters, down with the policemen. We have seen that smoke, that wall, that towering wall of smoke now subside, but as we know, they're still dealing with very, very tricky terrain down there, and we are also receiving some reports of perhaps additional survivors. We're not sure of those. Don, what are you hearing? Sorry. Don Daler is apparently having technical trouble down there, and no wonder. It's a very complicated area.
But just to recap what Diane's talking about, maybe we'll get the connection with Don, who is down right at the site where the recovery efforts are going on, such as they are right now. But the mayor earlier told us that they had found 2 people alive, and that they were in contact with a third and were trying to find that person. And he said there were a number of other calls, cell phone calls that had come out of the rubble, but they couldn't tell exactly how reliable some of those reports were of calls that had come out. He said there's really only one person that we know is in there and alive, and we're trying to find him. So we will try to get to Don Daler in just a few moments. Also joining us this morning, former director of the CIA, Admiral Jim Woolsey, who is with us. Admiral Woolsey, can you hear me?
Of Army Captain, Charlie. Just Mr. is fine.
Okay. All right. Mr. then. Your sense, I've asked a number of people, and I would ask you the same thing. Your sense of where we're going to be a week from now, what kinds of things we're going to learn over the next few days?
Well, I hope very much we're going to start looking hard at who might have been behind this, and I don't mean just bin Laden. This operation looks quite sophisticated and rather broad-based, the sort of operation that might well have an intelligence service of a country behind it. And the Clinton administration at first pursued in 93 and 94, and the FBI did, the possibility that Iraq was behind the World Trade Center bombing in 93. And then it abandoned that theory and moved off to believing that most of these terrorist operations were loose associations of people who just sort of came together, or later on, bin Laden. But it didn't go back to looking for a possibility of state sponsorship behind them. It's time now to resuscitate that. Look, there is, I think, a fair amount of opinion growing that the Iraqi government could conceivably have been behind the World Trade Center bombing of 1993. And the difference between this act of war against the United States and December 7th, 1941, is in 1941 we saw those red rising suns on the wings of the attacking aircraft, and we knew who had attacked us. Now it's fine for us to be angry. It's fine for us to want to respond. It's fine for us to say it's an act of war. I think all of those things are true. But we need to get quite clear exactly who may have been responsible for this. The president talked last night about harboring terrorists. Afghanistan harbors bin Laden, and he may well have been involved, but there may have been more involved here than harboring. Could have been somebody else behind that.
How could, given the sophistication of this operation, the question that's going to be asked a lot in coming months, how did U.S. intelligence miss it?
Well, I think there's several things to be said. One is they may, we've really heard from the Secretary this morning, have picked up generally that something was going to happen, but not that this particularly was. Secondly, they have stopped a number of other terrorist incidents, including a number right around the time of Y2K, but this is a business in which you have to stop everything, and this was a terrible tragedy. A third thing is that the CIA guidelines issued in 95, I'd hasten to say after I left, make it difficult, not impossible, but difficult to recruit people inside terrorist organizations as spies, because they put a deterrent on if you're trying to recruit someone with a violent past. Well, you know, the only people inside terrorist organizations are violent people. You don't just recruit nice people if you want to learn what's going on in terrorist organizations. And then finally, I think they may have been looking very, very hard at the terrorist organizations themselves, but not enough at the possibility of a state behind it, whether Iraq, Iran, I think is less likely, or some other. But I think Iraq would have to be the principal candidate.
Before we let you go, one other question, though. There were not only restrictions put on the CIA in the period of time that you talk about after you left, but there were restrictions put on the kind of intelligence that could be gathered, particularly back in the 70s, when a lot of people feel to some extent the CIA was dismantled. Well, one of the things that may come out of this, will it be, do you think, a really thorough going over of U.S. intelligence capabilities and, in effect, to some extent, unfetter the CIA?
Well, I hope that human intelligence, which is really the main way you're going to get intelligence about terrorist organizations, gets back some of the resources that they had for the Y2K period, and they've been slimmed down, unfortunately, since then. But I think George Tenet, the DCI, takes a real interest in human intelligence, and he's worked very hard to do the best he can with the resources that he's given. I think it's mainly a question of resources and removing some of these constraints that are the result of political events of the past, wholly unrelated to terrorism.
All right, thanks. Jim Woolsey, I appreciate you being with us this morning. Thanks. Thank you very much. All the best to you.
All right, I want to check because I believe we have Don Daler up now, and I want to make sure that we do. Can you just tell me, Mayor? Yes. done. We see you there down at the scene, and as we said, we are hearing reports of additional survivors. Can you tell us anything more?
That's right. Well, you remember back at Oklahoma City when little bits of good news started to trickle in as time went by. That's the case now. We have the report that there have been 6 survivors pulled out, one of whom is a Port Authority police officer named Jay McLaughlin. He has been taken to the hospital. The Port Authority police wanted us to announce that so that his family would know that he is okay. That's one individual we know about. In addition to that, there were 5 firemen recovered from the World Trade Center alive and taken to the hospital. I have with me here Fireman Bill Duty. Now, why is it that do you believe that they were able to survive such a horrendous accident?
Well, they were fortunate enough to fall into a void. When the building fell, there must have been a part of the structure that kind of surrounded them and protected them from the falling debris. So when the debris fell on the side, they were in an air pocket, and they just stayed there until help arrived. I don't know what company they were from, but there were 5 firefighters and 1 officer, so 6 men.
Were they badly injured?
I don't know how the injuries were, but I know they got them out, so.
Does this give you hope that there will be other survivors being pulled out?
Oh, absolutely. I have a lot of hope, especially for people that were below grade, because there's a lot of voids down there. The building, the first few floors is kind of still intact. So I'm hoping that most people under grade, there might be a lot of voids, but unfortunately most people that were above the first few floors, very little hope as far as I know.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one thing, Charlie. As we were walking through this massive debris field a little bit earlier, one of the things that struck me was it is a huge debris field, but for the size of those buildings, it really didn't seem like it would be that size. You would think it was much, much larger than that until you realize that there are parts of the World Trade Center all around us. The building was literally pulverized. There is a fine dust for miles around this area, and that is why that it's not just one big pile there that you would imagine. You can only get an idea of how huge these buildings were if you stood in their shadow before this happened.
Yes, and another point that I think needs to be made, and we'll find out more about that, is we learned at the time of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, there are, you know, those buildings went way down. Actually, they went 70 feet into bedrock. There were garages below, and obviously there's going to be a lot of sunken debris as well. But the pile of debris, 5, 6 stories high. And as Mayor Giuliani said, it is going to be weeks, maybe even months before they've gone through all of it.
I think I mentioned last night that when I went down there, you can hear a groan from the still standing parts of the buildings. It's an actual sound, almost like an avalanche about to pour down on you. Well, we want to go to ABC's Lisa Stark, who covers aviation, because we said there is news this morning both about what may have happened on board these flights and also some additional information about air travel today in the U.S. Let me just start and ask you, first of all, what do we know now about airlines resuming operation today?
Well, we know that the Federal Aviation Administration, Diane, is still hoping to get planes back in the air starting around noon today. Airline sources tell us they're still waiting for final word from the FAA on the exact security measures that will be taken. That has not officially come down yet, so they're waiting on that before they figure out what they're going to do today. But the FAA says it hopes to have flights resuming around noon. We expect in about 2.5 hours to hear officially from the Department of Transportation announcing what exactly will be taking place to try to get flights back in the air. You're putting up some of the things we've learned that they will be implementing. No curbside check-in. They'll be doing random ID checks, both of employees and passengers. Only passengers past the checkpoints and on. Obviously, a tightening of security, like the type of security we saw during the Gulf War. You're also expected to see much more visible security at the airports. Local police, possibly some military police as well, will be at a number of the airports, especially in the Washington, D.C. and the New York City area as well. It will take the airlines time to ramp up. One airline I spoke with this morning said there's a number of scenarios on the table. Perhaps by late this afternoon they could be at 20% ramp up. It will take a number of days for them to get the systems back up and running and to get planes going again.
Yes, I gather the airports just look like parking lots at the moment. Since there are no planes in the air, they're all on the ground in airports and have to be parked. There are not enough gates to accommodate them.
I'm sure that's probably true. The airplanes are just sitting there. They are not even where they would normally be at this time in the morning because they didn't go on to whatever their final destinations would be. So that's another sort of thing that the airlines and their operations center have to work out. What airplane is where and where do they need to get that airplane to? Charlie, I have some new information about the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center that I'd like to tell you about this morning that I've just managed to gather from some government sources of mine. We were talking about earlier about this code that the pilot can push a button and send a code. The code is 7500, by the way, to let controllers know that the plane is being hijacked. We had some indications that no code was sent. I have another government source now that indicates to me that, in fact, none of the planes sent that particular code out, indicating that a hijacking was in progress. On top of that, I have learned that those hijackers apparently were very, very sophisticated in how these planes worked and what they needed to do. Because what I have learned this morning from government sources is that on the 2 planes, at least, that went into the World Trade Tower, apparently on the American Airlines Flight 11, the transponder on that plane was turned off entirely. Now, this is the system that sends a signal to air traffic controllers. It identifies the plane, the altitude, things like that. And apparently the transponder was turned off on American Flight 11, according to government sources. And what that would mean is that all controllers are seeing is a blip on their screen, no information about the particular plane, no information about its altitude, what plane it is. As they say, they're just getting a skin paint off of the plane. On the United Airlines Flight 175, someone apparently changed the transponder code on that one, and what that does, I'm told, is that the computer then doesn't recognize the plane anymore. So again, they're not getting good information about what plane it is, what altitude it is at, only seeing blips on their screen. So whoever was doing that in the cockpit had that carefully planned so that no one could know what was going on and what the intentions were at the time.
And yet a couple of other reports out this morning, Lisa, that initially on Flight 11, that first plane to go into the first tower, air traffic controllers could hear someone, that the pilot had pushed a button and allowed them to hear, apparently, the hijackers talking in English, saying what?
I have 2 conflicting sources on that this morning, Diane. I have one government source that says that's not inconsistent with the reports that they have heard, that for a time the microphone was keyed open on that American Airlines Flight 11, the first flight to go into the World Trade Tower. That source could not tell me what was being said. I talked to a second government source who indicated that they were not sure that the mic was keyed open on that plane. So I think this is still information that's developing, and we just don't know for certain if the pilot had, in fact, opened the microphone and some conversations were being heard.
But I'm fascinated by that information that the transponders were turned off and that they never sent the hijacking signal. What that would tell me, and you're far more sophisticated in this than I am, what that would tell me is that the hijackers had the controls of those planes very early in the flights.
Or clearly were threatening enough to at least direct pilots to do that particular action. I mean, if the transponders were turned off or changed in some way, as I said, someone was very, very sophisticated in knowing that that's what they needed to do, not to become a stealth aircraft, obviously. They're still being able to be seen on radar, but really there was no communication with these planes, I believe, from controllers. At least one of the plane, all the communication systems were shut down. I don't know exactly what plane that was. So these hijackers wanted to be as isolated as they could up there to keep people guessing what was going on as they carried out their attacks.
All right, thanks very much. Lisa Stark is joining us from Seattle, Washington.
I want to check now because, as we know, it is a national tragedy, but for so many families, for so many individuals around the country, it is, well, there's just an infinity of human heartbreak out there. And part of this modern age is that so many people say that they heard cell phone calls coming in, that they heard from loved ones. There's the flight attendant who called to say what was going on board. There is a son who called his father to say he thought they were going to crash. There is the wife of Solicitor General Theodore Olson, who called her husband twice saying that there were men on board a plane with knives and the passenger reportedly hiding out in the bathroom of a plane, who called 911. Well, I want to bring in, if we can, Alice and Vaughn Hoagland. And Alice Hoagland is the mother of Mark Hoagland. Vaughn is his uncle, and they are joining us from Sarasota, California this morning. And first of all, we can only say to you that we are so grateful in this horrible moment that you came and are with us this morning, and we thank you. Mrs. Hoagland.
Very glad you asked us.
Mrs. Hoagland, tell me what happened. What was the call that came in?
Well, at 6:45 yesterday morning, the phone rang. A friend of the family, Carol Phipps, answered it, ran to get my sister-in-law, Mark's aunt, Kathy. He said to her, "I wanted to let you know that I love you." And Kathy told him, "Well, we love you, Mark." And then she went to get me. I ran to the phone. Mark said, "Mom, this is Mark Bingham." He gave me his last name. He was so rattled. He said, "I want to let you know that I love you." I told him that we all love him. He said that he was on United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco, and that there were 3 guys who had taken over the aircraft, and they say they have a bomb. I asked him, "Who are these people?" And he seemed distracted, didn't hear the question, didn't answer. Then he came back on, said, "It's true." And I said, "I believe you." I told him I loved him, and then it went dead. He was not calling from a cell phone. He was calling from the air phone, probably at his seat. He was seated at the back of first class toward the front of the aircraft. It was a pretty light load that day. We were hoping that Mark had a chance to perhaps work with other passengers to thwart the intent of these hijackers.
Yes, you point out, this is Charlie Gibson, you point out...
Hello, Mr. Gibson.
How are you?
Hi.
And boy, I mean, you know, everybody, the stories in all of this are so heart-rending, and yours obviously so much so. And that flight, for people who aren't aware and can't keep all these planes straight, this is the plane that had left Newark, headed for San Francisco, and that's the plane that crashed in western Pennsylvania, southeast of the city of Pittsburgh. And there are actually reports that perhaps, and I hope it is some consolation to you, there are reports that perhaps the passengers on that plane were able to overwhelm the hijackers.
We hope so. We know that Mark was a very active and take-charge guy. He was a large man. It's likely, based on things that we've heard, that he was able to participate in at least thwarting the efforts of these people that took control of the aircraft. We know that of the 4 aircraft that were hijacked, his was the only one that didn't reach its target. And we hope that Mark was able to take an active stand against these folks.
When he called you to express his love to you and to his aunt, did you have a sense from him, or did he say explicitly that he thought this plane was going to go down?
No, he didn't have a chance to say anything like that. I could tell by his voice that he was quite concerned. He was calm, but I could tell he was frightened. Telling me his last name, this is Mark Bingham. Incidentally, he is a big supporter of Senator John McCain. We were very touched by the eloquence of Senator McCain earlier. He is a very patriotic young man, as is his Aunt Kathy. And all of us here, we're very touched by the words of our president. We hope that this horrible set of events will help to bring the American people together in a real effort against this kind of terrorism. I'm a flight attendant for United Airlines, and as is my sister. Mark was flying on a companion pass from my sister Candace Hoagland.
And Did you watch the television reports, Ms. Hoagland, Mr. Hoagland, or was it harder?
It was difficult to watch all of them.
As soon as we got the call from Mark, we called the FBI and we turned on the TV and realized that this horrible thing that Mark was involved in was part of a national crisis.
His flight was actually the last to meet its final end, so we had hopes that maybe something would happen where he'd be able to, he's an active guy and he's not one to sit on his hands, and I think that if there was anything done to thwart the people, that he was involved in it. I know him, and I know the way he thinks, and he would not sit idly by, especially since there's a good chance that I think that he probably knew that it was indeed a suicide mission. He has access to Palm Pilots and internet capabilities, a pretty electronic savvy guy. And I think that somehow he found out that they had no intention of landing any of the passengers safely, and he took it upon himself, maybe recruited other people. We have hoped that he played an active role in doing whatever he could and keeping that plane from getting to what we now know was Camp David.
We should tell everyone, and I hope I'm right on this, he was 31 years old, owned his own public relations firm on the East Coast, and a graduate of Berkeley.
Yes. Well, Alice, Vaughn, our love to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Charlie, Diane.
You take care.
Thank you.
It's 8 o'clock on the East Coast, and we want to reset, give you some sense of what's going on, the latest information we have. The good news this morning comes from the rescue site of the World Trade Center towers in downtown New York. We don't know that there's going to be a whole lot of good news from there, and indeed I suspect over the next few days there'll be a lot of bad news. But 6 people rescued in the last few hours, 5 firefighters, 1 policeman. We don't know if the mayor, when he was with us about an hour ago, was talking about somebody different, but he also said that they were in contact with someone by phone, and that perhaps there was one other person to be rescued. I don't know if that person was among these 6 or not.
Let's go back. We are going to see the scenes once again. As of this hour, down at the World Trade Center, there is still fire down there. We could see just a little bit earlier that underneath there is still fire beneath some of the soot and some of the flames.
The picture there that you're seeing is of the first plane, American Flight 11, hitting the first of the World Trade Center towers at 8:45 yesterday morning, just under 24 hours ago. That is the event which led or began this incredible series of circumstances that has brought us to where we are right now.
And because some of you may be joining us at this half hour, we want to go back to Don Daler for a minute, who was there for a second, and let him just tell us once again what's happening at this hour. Don?
Well, what's been happening for about the past 6.5 hours is the slow, agonizing, slow process of sifting through the wreckage, a massive amount of wreckage. They're having to take a slow way, cutting away different pieces of metal. What you can see is it looks like another shift change. We've been seeing different National Guardsmen, police, rescue workers coming up Church Street. There's almost a universally consistent look on their face. Weariness, numbness, and they have this haunted look in their eye. There was a National Guardsman from the 258 Artillery Unit out of Jamaica, Queens, who came by me, and I chatted with him for a moment, and he said that this was not the kind of war that he had trained for. Charlie?
All right, thanks very much, Don Daler. One little new piece of information, and it's an important one. President Bush has declared New York City to be a federal disaster area. Now, that disaster declaration allows New Yorkers who have been affected by the attack on the World Trade Center to apply for federal aid. That could be, it could be housing assistance, it could be medical assistance, it could be crisis counseling, it could be unemployment benefits. So there's all kinds of different benefits that entitles people to who have been affected by a disaster. And this is certainly, albeit man-made, this is certainly a disaster here in New York. And as we reported, the entire city, from 14th Street right to the tip of Manhattan Island, has been closed down for at least today. And as Mayor Giuliani pointed out, that's actually the 3rd largest urban area. Forget the rest of New York. That by itself is the 3rd largest urban area in the United States. That entire area shut down for the day, and they're going to make this decision on whether to close it down day by day. But as he pointed out, the area where the World Trade Center was, the World Trade Center complex, and it was a complex of buildings, 3 of which have now gone down, that will be closed for weeks and months. But it's really, for a New Yorker, and I understand many of you do not live in the city, but for a New Yorker, the fact that that much of the city has now been closed down is really startling. All of the financial centers, for instance, down in that area, and many very prominent neighborhoods.
Again, if you missed Mayor Giuliani earlier, he brought us up to date on casualty figures. He said he didn't know how many people had been reported missing overnight. They simply didn't have a tally on that. He talked about at least 1,000, more than 1,000 people whom he knew had been taken to hospitals and who were injured. He talked about 41
fatalities, 202 firefighters who are missing. Now, maybe that number's been brought down since they found 5 alive, but 202 that were missing and presumed dead at the time he talked to us, which was an hour ago, and 57 uniformed police officers. That's New York City Police and Port Authority Police, and among the firefighters in New York. And this is a great department here in New York, and we have talked a lot about firefighters and how important they are in the last year. 202 is a staggering number, and among that number, some of the top officials of the New York City Fire Department. The first group of firefighters, 400 firefighters who went into the World Trade Center, apparently about half of them perished.